city. We've been providing energy to Saskatchewan and the world, since the turn of the century. And it definitely, it's going to affect everything. Even there's $100 million worth of wages that'll be missing from the area once they shut off the coal-fired power production. So, and then the oil and gas industry, even I've been in it since the mid-90s, and the oil and gas industry has been in a recession since 2015 already. So there's at $80 a barrel, it should be a lot busier than it is, and there's just a lot missing. We still are producing and stuff like that, but it's just not good being told by our leaders that we're trying to eliminate your livelihoods.
Mike, do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I really do. I think it's important to think of it when they say just transition. That's a political word, and I think just is not the word that should be there. Maybe transition is a better word. It's not just to tell people that your livelihood's being cut, to tell people that you may not be able to put food on the table for your family. That's not just to me. So transition, maybe that's a word that needs a lot more discussion, but just using a just transition, it's political. It's very political, and I think ultimately it's an attack on people's livelihoods, and we see that from our residents in the way that they want us to communicate with our government. So
You are both from a natural resource part of this province of Saskatchewan. This is going to impact your municipalities. No matter how you play it, it will impact your municipalities. We are seeing that impact already. We are seeing resources not being moved, not being shipped to market. How has it impacted already? And I want to start with Tony on this. Have you seen some impact already, even though it's a relatively new bill that's being proposed?
Yeah, we've totally, honestly, the population of Estevan is around 11,000, and even 10 short years ago, it was probably closer to 15,000. So we've already lost that percentage of population. And just our house prices, the prices of everything, the property values have already dropped. When we were first elected in 2020, it was the first year that we had to deal with that. And like I said, we had a budget, everything looked good, and then our property values through SUMA came in, and our city was short $5 million, right? So definitely population, and then just the value of all the properties and everything it's been taking place already, and it's only going to be worse.
Do you see people moving into your communities?
Not in flocks and droves, but definitely
It's starting?
They're dwindling away. Just following, I call it following the buffalo. They're heading, they're going to the States. The energy workers that I work with, they're going to North Dakota, they're going to Texas and stuff like that, where they just feel more prosperous and not under attack, I guess, right? So just a little better future for them, and that's why they're doing it.
Now, Mike, along with your role as mayor of Torquay, you are also on FCM, and I am not going to throw you under the bus and ask to give me the FCM answer, but I want to ask because you're talking to municipalities across this country, and we're here at SUMA. Is this an issue that's not just affecting people in your communities, but all across Saskatchewan and even Western Canada?
yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about natural resources. In Saskatchewan, we have the Estevans, we have the Cornacs in the coal industry that are going to be decimated by this. And you can talk to the mayor of Cornac right now. People are trying to sell their houses and can't. Nobody to buy them. Nobody wants to move to those communities, and they're really looking at how they can bring some economic development. And you look at northern Saskatchewan with the way Cameco and the uranium stuff went down. I know it's coming back now, but the poverty that was up in northern Saskatchewan when the resource sector was basically shut down, it's quite scary for small communities on how to deal with residents and how to get them the supports and things that they need. And we need partners in municipalities. We all know that balanced budgets, we need to have them in municipalities, but when your industries are being shut down with no taxation money even coming in, you're pretty well decimated and limited in what you can do, right? So you have those homeless people maybe on your streets and with nowhere to go, finding funds to deal with that. And the next question is where do these people going to work? How are we going to be able to sell those houses that are there? The municipality just can't pick up the bill to take over these houses. There's a lot of thought that needs to go into this process, and I always say communication is the key, and right now we're not being communicated with at, I would say, all levels of government. We're not being communicated with, and it's tough to tell somebody that's a fourth generation natural resource worker that their livelihood's going to be pulled out from under them. They don't know anything else, and how do you train somebody that's maybe done the job for 40 years, still can't retire? How do you tell them you have to learn how to code, how to type on a computer, right? Like, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into this, and I don't think it has been thought out. And politics can be evil, and a lot of times it's ideology, right? Like, so I don't know how this gets fixed, but I really think it has to start with communication.
While you may not know how it's going to get fixed, and I see you nodding through what Mike was just saying there, you're on the front lines, and you're the ones who have to go tell these people that your job is no longer here. What do you do in this situation? And I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but there's a lot of humility going to tell someone that the town that supports you, the city that has raised you, no longer has a spot for you. Is it tricky? And I know I did not prepare you for this question. It's just the human aspect of this is huge, and I don't think we talk about that the most. For you, Tony, is it hard? Because I know you are in the energy industry. Is it hard to see people losing their jobs over policies from federal and provincial governments?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously human heartbreak is the craziest thing that people can go through, right? So it is, like I said, and the worst problem with it is the government's basically trying to tell us to evolve without innovation, right? There is no evolution without innovation, so that's why it makes no sense. Even on the power side of it, like how they're basically in the next couple of years going to be shutting coal down, and they're talking SMR nuclear, which is fine and dandy, but that's not going to be till like 2035 or something like that. So the human aspect of it is we're having an industry being shut down with nothing to replace it, which drives people bonkers, and it makes zero sense. So like I said, if the nuclears were being built right now, and let's say the nuclear came online, and then we were shutting our coal off, I think people can, it's easier to
That would be a transition.
deal to see it. That's a transition, exactly correct. So it's totally hard, right? So it's going to be, the next 5 years in Estevan are going to be hard times.
In our interview between you and I, we talked about the small nuclear reactors and the modules that the provincial government and the federal government. We talked earlier this year, it's been a few months. Has any progress happened on that file, or is the provincial government still, and I hate to use a phrase that someone else used this morning at SUMA, but I was listening into the towns and they're saying, we literally just need people to rubber stamp something, and it's not happening. Yeah. Has there been any progress on that file?
SaskPower is doing their due diligence, as they say. But they are like doing everything they can. But like I said, it just the timeline of everything, as you're saying, just makes zero sense. Like what is it, 2023? They're saying 2029 is when they're going to decide where they're going to build it. I mean, so that's 7 years from now, and it's just no good.
How do municipalities adapt? How do municipalities change this narrative? Because you are on the front lines, your villages, your towns, your cities are being affected by government policies. But you still are around. You still have to make the tough choices, and you have to sort of advocate. So how do you guys adapt to what's going on in the federal landscape and the provincial landscape? And I'll start with Mike on this one, if that's okay, because again, not trying to put you in a corner here, but you can yell until you're blue in the face. Unless someone's listening, you don't really, or you're yelling into a void. So what do municipalities have to sort of do to get ready for the worst of this?
Yeah, ultimately, economic development is one of those things that is needed. And in my case, a small community that maybe has 1 or 2 employees can't afford an economic development officer to help in those cases. So it's leaning on regional cooperation. It's leaning on different communities that have done different things to try and drive the economy. You can't just say, well, we're going to have a flower box and everybody's going to plant tomatoes and hopefully that survives us through the winter. That doesn't work. And small communities really don't have the expertise to economic development. You know, the federal government's promised money for their just transition, and I think they've promised it now 3 times, Tony, maybe it's something like that. And it's like, okay, you keep promising it, but roll out the dollars. Like, we need some funds before the 2030 deadline to actually do something in our communities before they are ultimately decimated. And it's the worst thing to say to somebody, you know, you're not going to have a job tomorrow. And going back to your question before, Chris, is, you know, we've been talking about mental health and addictions at this conference quite a bit, and those things just multiply when you tell somebody they have nowhere to go for a job. They're not going to have any money in their pocket, and maybe they just had a new baby. You know, the stress on people is going to be huge, and a focus of any level of government needs to be on how you fix or help. I guess fix isn't the word. It's help manage to get those people over that hump. And I always say, if you're going to roll something out that's new, maybe you should start in the schools, building up some momentum to train people when they're school age, not when they're 50, 60 for a new field, and start that way. Because ultimately, as municipal leaders, we want a clean environment for our residents. And we don't want to be polluting, as I guess the feds would say, but it's like, let's start rolling stuff out to gradually implement things. You can't have a straight cutoff date. It just doesn't work.
I'm going to ask a loaded question. I'm not prepared here.
Okay.
Is this plan even achievable?
No.
To quote myself during the pre-interview, Tony, elaborate.
It's not achievable, but I guess it does. You could say we were complacent in the way we did things. So at one time, it probably has woken us up to be economic. Basically, but any industry that we're looking at, you know what I mean, we're just throwing darts at it and see if it sticks. So
I find it fascinating because during our conversation, we talked about the environment. You said that climate change is here,
yeah.
And this is the federal government saying, okay, we need to do more to help it. But municipalities have been on the front lines of adapting. We just saw a presentation where literally a town just got an award because they've innovated of how they were transitioning away from just regular off-the-grid power to renewable power. Is this what municipalities need to do as well? Like, as much as the federal government's trying to hand fist this and say, okay, you guys have to do it by this date, are municipalities looking at other options as well?
yeah, we're totally looking at options, and the craziest part about it, there's 2 roadblocks in our way.
The federal government, I'm assuming, is one.
This is actually Sask Power, right? They have the monopoly on power, and there's been some options, some ideas come to our ECDEV. There's as simple as a biomass plant, where there's a company that wants to come to Estevan and build a biomass plant that burns crops that usually get burnt out in the fields. And you could say Sask Power is holding it up. Like, you would think that would be a no-brainer. Companies coming in want to spend it, and there's a hold-up. And then other industries that we're kind of been talking to, trying to get going, transition away. You have the rail, so you have Sask Power and rail that are there, and just trying to get answers out of them. Like, because obviously, if an industry comes to Estevan and they got to ship stuff out, has to be on rail. But then, you know, the railways won't even come to the table and talk about it, right? So it's frustrating on that, as we're being kind of forced. Like I said, we're being told to evolve without innovation, right? So, and it's just, and that's why I say it just, probably the plan is not going to happen.
You're being told to transition. You're being told that you have to wait to find out solutions to potentially transition. Are the 3 levels of government just not talking to each other?
The easiest answer for that is, even with mental health and all the talk that's been going on in SUMA here, is just people need to get in the room. We need to get together, come up with a solution, and not, oh, let's have a meeting and sit here and, oh, well, we might come back with this. We need to all get in the room, like every level, everybody involved, all the.
Do you think they want to though?
They're scared to. They're scared to
Is it-
because at the end of the day, they know what they're doing isn't good for. And that's a tough thing to say but at the same time, that's the only thing I can think of. It's like I said, they're just not thinking correctly, right? So, like I said, we can evolve. Even in Estevan, we had BD3. It's called the carbon capture, first in the world. It's eliminated over 5 million tons of CO2. And if you talk to anywhere in Saskatchewan, it's a bad thing. It just costs money. It's a waste and all this, but it's eliminating emissions, which is what we're supposed to do. I went to a conference in Edmonton, the first ever carbon capture conference is what it was called. The whole conference was about BD3, Estevan, the success, and all this glorification. Like I'm from the city where, the carbon capture happens, and I was even, thinking that, a waste of money. Well, not that I was thinking that, but when I went there, it was just such a, the world is looking at Estevan as this is what we all have to do. Yet our governments and everybody are like, nah.
When you say our government, you mean both federal and provincial, or just
Federal and provincial, yeah.
That's an interesting point, Tony. We hear from the federal government that it's going to take some money to transition. I'm going to say transition. I'm not going to use the word just anymore. I'm going to say transition away to different things. But when we have something that's innovative in this province, people look at it and say it costs too much.
Yeah. So
what's the next step when we start looking at nuclear and everything else that we have to transition to that costs too much? It's one of those things where I always hate when they say carrot and the stick, but if the federal government keeps using the stick, nobody wants to do it. There should be carrots out there for business to evolve, communities to get involved, but we're not seeing carrots. We're seeing sticks.
then just even in the past few years, like where this is the Sask government, this is where I'll give them props, is, the methane emissions out in the oil field. So it's kind of let industry do it, and that's what BD3 did. But with the methane, Sask government, we need to get our methane emissions down. They allowed the industry to do it, and in a couple of short years, we've eliminated our methane emissions in half, right? So I mean, it's, again, with the BD3, it's like, okay, emissions, we don't want the emissions in the air. Okay, we eliminated the emissions, and they're just like, well, you just can't burn coal. But what is the source or the fuel matter if you're eliminating the emissions, right? So it's just so many things that don't make sense.
We talked about the human cost of this transition, but the municipal cost is much more, because the more people lose their jobs, the more people will move away. You talk about this scenario where people can't even find people to sell their houses, but even if they have to, they'll walk away because there's no jobs. Is this potentially the final nail for small town Saskatchewan municipalities who are struggling already, who are potentially even going to see a worse mass exodus of people going into larger cities? And I'm going to pick on you here for a minute here, Mayor, but your community, I'm assuming if half the population left because they couldn't find work, that would kill your community.
Yeah, absolutely. But ultimately, I think Saskatchewan's pretty resilient, and we'll find a way to continue. The problem I see is people walk away, the properties become the property of the municipality. What environmental footprint does that leave? When you have an abandoned house sitting there rotting, essentially, there's an environmental impact to that, and we'll find a way to cope, but it's the way it's being done, and communication that is not happening, and people don't want to get in the room, like you said, Tony. They rather sit there and eat the donut and drink the coffee and not talk about the real issues, and then go back to whoever their bosses are and say, well, we consulted and we think we're going ahead with something in the future, and that's not the way it should be going. It should be, we need people on the ground talking to us about what's happening in our community.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate with both of you here for a second. You are mayors and councillors. You have to make decisions as well. Not everyone's going to be happy with the decisions you make. Is this just not that? Is this just the federal government knowing that it's going to upset some people, but at the end of the day, they have to make it because they believe that it's in the best of Canada? And I'm not trying to put you guys on the spot. It's just because I'm looking at it from an elected official position, right? Because I've talked on my show, and I've even asked you to, how do you balance the needs of the many against the needs of the few?
Yeah, ultimately, and I'll maybe start on this, Tony, you can fill in, but ultimately it comes down to dollars. In communities, if we're transitioning, if that's the ultimate goal, dollars need to be there to help communities out. And, government's going to say what they're going to say. And votes matter in certain parts of the country more than the other parts of the country.
You're breaking my... Stop the presses, everyone.
I don't know if your listeners know about that, but that's actually, in my opinion, very true for Saskatchewan. Votes matter in different places, and our residents are wanting to be just as green as everybody else. And there's a lot of things happening in Saskatchewan that have led the world and don't get the recognition it deserves. And we're always seen as bad. We throw our garbage on the street or whatever people think, wherever they are. But, our agriculture industry is leading the world in Saskatchewan. We have the Boundary Dam Capture Program. We're looking at lithium development. And, we're trying to be everything to everyone in Saskatchewan, and we get chastised in the East for things that we want to transition away from, but the dollars aren't there.
As the Eastern in the group here, I can tell you that when I was growing up, Alberta and Saskatchewan were known as the oil riggers, right? You come and you go work in the oil industry. But I've lived here for now 10 years, and I can tell you it's completely opposite. You guys are a friendly bunch of people. You guys are hardworking. Mm-hmm. And I shouldn't say you guys because I'm part of it now, and I know some people out west might not even consider me a Western because I've only lived here for 10 years. But even this weekend when I've been attending SUMA, everyone's welcomed me with open arms, and no one's rejected me or said you can't be here. Everyone's just being honest and open, and I think that's at the end of the day, that's the persona of Western Canada. Is you want the best for your provinces and your municipalities. Just the federal government just doesn't tell that story, right?
No, that's true. So, and it's like how far away are we or whatever, right? So, yeah, no, you know what I mean? I kind of love being Canadians, but it's sometimes, especially the past few years, you know what I mean? It's one of those things that's getting harder and harder too, right?
So for you, Tony, going back to what Mike was saying, how do you do it? How do you balance the needs of your community with the individual, with the federal government needing to balance the needs of the country with the individual provinces?
Good question. It's just, yeah.
And I'm going to stop talking for the next half hour, everyone.
No, that's a good question. I don't even know if I have the answer to that.
But you do it in your daily.
You have to represent everyone, and look out for each other. And as you're saying about how resilient people and stuff like that, like Estevan will survive. It definitely.
Do you think so?
Go away. It'll persevere. Yeah, there's so many innovations, technologies, and stuff. Like I said, if one thing that does come out of transition is just kind of wakes everybody up, and the ECDEV boards, and we have tech hubs, and just we're bringing new light, onto Estevan, and again we can be known as innovative and go from there. So, but yeah, it's just a balance, and like I said, I don't know how to answer that about the federal government actually.
We were at this conference for 3 days. They had resolutions. One of them was work more collaboratively with your rural municipalities, with each other. How do you do that when it comes to an issue like this? Because every municipality in your area of the province are facing this issue, and you have to be a unified voice. And with some of those votes that I saw today, not a lot of the unified voices in this group, but at the end of the day, you have to for the betterment of your communities. How do you see yourselves working with SUMA, SARM, and your individual municipalities to start working at a collaborative, unified message to say, guys, Ottawa, sit down, come talk to us, because we actually are doing things to help you. You guys just don't acknowledge it.
Yeah, Good question, and I think municipalities in Saskatchewan that are facing this are open to anything that can help their community survive. Essentially, you have to be open to working with your partners, and in Saskatchewan we have those hockey rivalries, right? Like Torquay and Onger never really got along, but you have to find ways to work with those people, and you have to get over that bridge. And certain things like right now in my community, we're partnering with our local RM on fire departments and our rec center, and I guess it's not a rec center, but a community center, and just things like that. That's where you got to start. You got to start small and try and build that trust. And I think ultimately, and you've probably seen it over this week, Chris, that there are some communities that are working well with their neighbors. There are some communities that are not working well with their neighbors, and that's very evident. But ultimately, you got to start small, and at the end of the day, we're trying to do the best we can for our residents, and it's other people that are making the decisions for our residents and not the municipal leaders.
What would you want the federal government to know? If you could sit down with the federal government, whether it be an MP from the government or a cabinet minister, what would you want them to know?
That energy is 24/7, 365 days of the year. And I think lots of people get lost in that fact. They may think that electricity comes from the wall and food comes from the grocery store. I guess the urban-rural split kind of is coming into that, where, you know what I mean? Basically that message is, energy doesn't stop. So obviously renewable energy is an assistance, but it's not 24/7. So, and we can't live without it.
Yeah, I would ultimately agree with that, and sure, we're getting better at solar panels, we're getting better at windmills, but ultimately the technology isn't there yet, and we're trying to transition to something that the technology isn't there yet. And you want to go charge your Tesla in Saskatchewan, you have two on the block, you blow the whole breaker out of the system. We're not there. We won't be there by 2030, and eventually people need to realize that there's a lot more that goes into this than just saying we're done with oil and gas, we're done with coal production.
If there's anything I've learned over the last 10 years living in Western Canada, this government is not good at hitting their targets. So I'm pretty sure you're good for not hitting 2030. I'm not trying to throw any shade there, but I'm just being honest. Renewables. And this is the big last section before we wrap up here, guys. Is there a place for renewables for municipalities? We talked about Ludston earlier on, about how they innovated with their unique infrastructure projects. Are smaller communities even able to deal with that issue? And how do cities work with renewables? Is there solar farms going up? Is there wind farms? As much as they're eyesores, they do produce electricity.
Yeah, they're talking about it. And again, I just don't even look at wind and solar as producing energy, right? Obviously, they're producing when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing, but that's it. And again, that's where I get into that energy is 24/7, and those are not.
Okay.
So that's the way I look
Yeah,
at it.
well,
What about hydro, though? Hydroelectric.
Yes, that you do have. We also have a little geothermal project that's taken off, so that would be base load power. That's the word that you use for 24/7 base load power. So
My father, who worked at a nuclear plant, is laughing right now. He's just like, I told him he would not come in handy when he was older.
Yeah, but hydro even, obviously Manitoba, I do believe we import hydropower.
Yeah.
Even as an example with that is last summer, the water levels were so low in Manitoba, they wouldn't export power. So now SaskPower, and Saskatchewan should not be importing power. We should be exporting power and making a boatload of money. It's just to rely on someone else. Like I said, obviously they're moving lots of stuff down to North Dakota. They're getting rid of our coal jobs in Estevan, replacing them with coal jobs in North Dakota, bringing in coal power from North Dakota. So, it just makes no sense. Obviously, don't shut off what's reliable, I guess is my message.
yeah, that's a good point, Tony. Ultimately, renewables are subsidy on the baseload power, in my opinion. and you look at Saskatchewan, they were going to go ahead with a hydro dam in northern Saskatchewan, and it just didn't work. They canceled it. And that wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years ago now. So, you know, as we get better in renewals, maybe there's an option for it, but ultimately they're just subsidizing the baseload power that's there. And geothermal's a great example. It's baseload, but there's also a draw on that system too from that it's not completely a full baseload, right?
Yeah,
so
it's not proven
yeah,
yet, right?
that's
So
right. So, you know, we're still looking at technologies, in my opinion, and we're still trying to move forward with the technology. And the things that are working, we're going to shut them off and go with something that hasn't been proven. And I don't know if people want to deal with that.
This is coming, and this is the big question. Your municipalities have to be ready for it, and you have to start 10 years ago to be ready for this, if they actually do hit their targets. How do you do that?
I wish I had the $1 million question, but it's as easy as if everybody doesn't come to the table and do this together, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and
It's
ultimately,
the only way it could be.
Do you see any silver lining that they're even willing to come to the table? Like, there must be like something in the back of your head saying, okay, what is the reason for them not wanting to come to the table? Yes, they don't want to hear what you have to say, but half the times as mayors, you don't want to, or as councillors, you don't want to hear what your residents have to say, but you were elected to hear what they all say, and you have to give them respect.
yeah, absolutely.
What the hell, pardon my French here, is going on, and why aren't they willing to meet with you?
Well, maybe I'll throw the elephant in the room out. A lot of times it's politics. We have a provincial government in Saskatchewan that really doesn't like the federal government, and we have a federal government that doesn't really like the provincial government. And municipalities are caught in the crosshairs of anything that's happening. And both levels of government are pitting one against the other when they talk to municipalities. Carbon capture, federal government say we have a program for that. Provincial government says there's no program for that, right? So they're playing each other, and eventually it's going to lead to municipalities being at the end of the whole life, and they're saying, well, now what, and communication, and we don't get that, and the
There's
infighting.
only one taxpayer.
That's right.
And the taxpayer of the Saskatchewan province and the taxpayer of the federal government are the exact, and the municipality are the exact same person. But for some reason, and you've said it so eloquently, and Tony, jump in here, that taxpayer is getting pulled in 3 different directions and told 3 different things.
Yeah, that's just where, like I said, that's what I was saying earlier, is if we could see solutions coming online and then shut in the old ones off, you know, it would be much easier for people to understand, right? So, because really right now is, you know, we're kind of being told federal policy to eliminate coal-fired production and the carbon tax. No, not too many people. The funniest story the past probably month, just people in Estevan even, they're just, my energy bill and power bills are just, they're skyrocketing. What's going on? It's like, it's the carbon tax. It's like kind of, where have you been the last 10 years? Like,
Is it the carbon tax, or is it the distribution fee? Because in Alberta, the distribution fee is freaking enormous compared to anything else on that bill.
Yeah, like we haven't had too many rate increases. It's obviously just the carbon tax. And then in Sask Power's defense, you know, the federal policy of coal is basically what's happening now, even with carbon taxes, it's just shipping our emissions to North Dakota, which unfortunately emissions equal jobs.
Yep.
So North Dakota's benefiting, and the people of Saskatchewan are not.
Yeah, and ultimately, we're starting to change to natural gas, which will eventually be nuclear. Natural gas is going to have a carbon tax on in 2035, I believe, somewhere in there. So people are going to get...
Natural gas doesn't have a carbon tax on it?
Well, it will, but the plant emissions from the plant will be taxed in 2035. I believe that's the year. And then, so then that's the clean we want to go to right now. So Saskatchewan's building natural gas plants, so 2035 comes, which isn't that far away. No. And we're getting hit again, and then we're going to go nuclear by that time, which we're going to get hit again. So people's rates are going to go through the roof, and there's no real answer to it, except we're going to build a power line connection to the United States or Manitoba where there's hydro, and we're going to import it until there's no power to import. And what do we do?
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, governments of all levels, federal, provincially, municipally, are all broke. So
You're absolutely right.
where is this money gonna come from? Like, we could, like, they say carbon capture is expensive, and they figured it's costing 1.6 billion. Well, one nuclear power plant, SMR, is gonna be $10 billion, and that's 300 megawatts of power. Where's that gonna come from? And why is 1.6 billion expensive and 10 billion for an SMR not? And again, like, all the governments are broke. Where's all this money gonna come from? So that's my.
Us, the taxpayer.
Well, that's at the end of the day, though.
Well, that's exactly it. And municipalities get, what is it, 9 cents on every dollar of taxes they bring in for them.
Yeah.
We go that way. How do you get to minus? I guess that's because the taxpayer is going to be, we're not paying your property taxes anymore.
Oh, that's right. And it's just, you can't, like, obviously in Estevan, there's no way you could double the taxes. Like, you just couldn't do it. Everybody would foreclose, and so you're kind of, again, you can't be able to stay and get water out of stone, right? So, and I think everybody are almost taxed to the max right now. Like, you'd have to admit, I don't know, for myself, I'm at least probably 50%. Everything I make goes to the old government, and I mean, if it keeps going more and
My
more.
small business tax just came in, and I can tell you, I was not too happy seeing that, the small
No,
business tax.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. 50% goes to the government off your income tax. Plus you have your property tax you got to pay.
Oh.
Plus the GST, PST in Saskatchewan, right? Like everything you're doing is taxing, and at the end of the day, it's more
Is it
than
hard
50%.
for municipalities to deal with that then? Because at the end of the day, the province has to do what they have to do. The federal government has to. I know we're not talking about just transition now, but I want to get on that point. You guys are always looked at to say, you have to help us. The province is going to do what they want to do because they're in Regina. The federal government's going to want to do what they want to do because you're in Ottawa. You, the municipality, though, you can make the biggest difference because a 0% increase on taxes is good because that means they know what they're getting. But at the end of the day, for municipalities, that means services has to be cut, infrastructure projects have to be canceled, and the growth has to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it comes down to what services you want to cut, and as municipalities, we're seeing the federal government push stuff down to us, the province push down stuff to us, and what are we going to cut? We talked about homelessness and addiction, and shelters. Are they out the door so people sleep on the streets? You know, what are we cutting? So there will be tough decisions have to be made in the future, and maybe I won't be around to make them. I don't know.
Yeah, just kind of example on that is everybody's landfills. You know, last year was the first SUMA I was in person, and everybody's landfills. Well, it's because there's a policy coming down that you have to do this to your landfill or shut it in, but there's no assistance, so you're kind of being told to do something without anything to back it up, and it just makes 0 sense to me. And
Yeah,
I guess
you always hear
that's where we are.
Yeah, you always hear from environment. We're the regulator. We're not the funder.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's leave on a positive note. What's the silver lining for municipalities in this situation? This is the last question, and then I'm going to wrap up. So I'll start with Mike because I started with Tony. And actually, I'll start with Tony first. Tony, what's the silver lining in your views to hopefully give municipalities, give oil workers, give resource workers a hope that something could actually happen where it's not going to affect their bottom dollar and their livelihoods?
Yeah, it's just going to be, I think the only way that there would be some silver lining is, again, just to, like I've probably said it a few times now, that, you know, the transition talks have started the innovation talks, but when innovation comes, we need support from everybody, right? So the silver lining is that there yet? No, but obviously it's going to come to a point where we have to come together and you know, just get serious about things here. So obviously I think lots of things get thrown out there and they just see if it sticks to the wall or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, it's, you know, until, like even for coal, I know that, you know, they say it's going to be over, but at the same time, nothing's over till the buzzer goes.
Till the big lady sings at the TCU place.
Till the big lady sings at TCU.
Mike, what about yourself? What's the silver lining for yourself, and what do you hope to see?
Yeah, and Thanks for the question, Chris. A silver lining for me is it has driven some innovation. We're seeing Arizona Lithium move in that's going to use oil workers in southeast Saskatchewan for lithium production. Deep geothermal is another one, and there could be some spin-offs on that, greenhouses, different things. You know, it's not driven by the federal government, this innovation. Once again, it's small businesses innovating to meet what's needed. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about funding, and that's where I say that's the carrot. Why aren't you funding these innovators to really help municipalities find their way? At the end of the day, we will get there. I think our communities will get there. It's just needing the help from innovators, which is not the federal government. The federal government is not an innovator. They're the ones that are dictating what we need to do. They have, you know, when you go ask somebody, we need this, what's the solution? Well, the federal government doesn't have a solution. They're just telling us what to do, and we will find a way, but ultimately, I think both myself and Tony are saying we need help. We need funds to do that, and we will drive that change eventually.
And yeah, just to add to that, just be allowed to continue with the solutions, right? So if we're given a policy, whether it's good or bad, again, the industry and the people will find the result, right?
I want to thank you both. I know I gave you the questions beforehand, and I went completely off script. So
I told you to do that. I told you to.
Exactly. No, I asked you a few of them. I just threw them into different orders. But you're right, Tony. Energy is 24/7, 365 days a year, and I think I need to start looking at it more in that lens as well. When you said that, it really did hit me that you need energy, because it's the lights in your house, it's the car on the road, it's the shirts that we're wearing right now, it's the this, that, it's even the road, the energy to make the concrete. So thank you so much for enlightening me in that. And Mike, thank you so much for sitting down and doing this. It's been an honor to chat with you guys, and hopefully somebody is watching this and understands that people need to get to the table together. And until we do that, municipalities are pooched. And I'm not trying to say that rudely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, my phone's always on to have that conversation with somebody that's listening. We need to talk, and it can't be walls. We need to have a real talk on what's happening out there.
Couldn't agree more.
So with that, this has been a live edition of the Cross-Border Interviews with Chris Brown. We are broadcasting live from the TCU Place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Until tomorrow, everyone. Talk to you then.